Ladies and gentlemen, James Lane here, and in this video, I'm going to take the Gulag Archipelago, I'm going to open it up to Chapter 2, and I'm going to dissect it for you. Why is this important? Because Chapter 2 of the Gulag Archipelago lays out exactly what the left plans to do to Trump supporters if they successfully steal this election. It's time to arm yourself with the knowledge. Stay tuned. Ladies and gentlemen, James Lane here, and I've got my copy of the Gulag Archipelago, and I know that you know what it is. If you don't know what it is, you can Google it, all right? You can Google the Gulag. Folks, it's by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. We mostly hear about him from Jordan Peterson, a couple other folks that are kind of important in the higher circles there, Dinesh D'Souza, different things like that. But guys, everybody talks about it, but nobody actually shows you what it means. And it's something you need to see to believe, if you know what I mean. So folks, what I'm going to do, and by the way, I hope you enjoy the fireplace. You could also see it as an oven. I mean, really, it's a precursor depending upon which way we go. If the right wins, we go towards nice, cozy fireplaces. If the left wins, we go towards ovens in a gulag. But folks, we have to understand the past to really be able to read the future. And I'm big on understanding the past. My favorite book is the memoirs of U.S. Grant. So, I mean, and it's not even a book. It's literally his biography written by him. But anyway, I digress. You have to go through this, and not a lot of people have the patience for it. Not a lot of people understand how to mine the data, how to research and pull it out and make it understandable and put two and two together and regurgitate it for people. There's a lot of voices out here these days. There's a lot of blue check marks. There's a lot of gold badges, but a lot of them are just retweeters, echoers, not a lot of original thoughts. So what I want to do is I'm going to make the American Reveille here. I'm going to make myself unique. I'm going to use my skill set, and I'm going to go through Chapter 2. And I'm going to make you understand what happens if Biden steals this election, folks. So I'm going to take my very patriotic pen here, put it down out of the book, and we're going to start reading. And as I get to important parts of this, I'm going to pause and I'm going to explain some stuff to you. We're going to have a good time. This might take a little while. It's not going to be as long as the podcast that I did the other day on Sidney Powell's case. And I appreciate, by the way, all of the warm wishes for my migraine. I feel so much better. So thank you very much. But I want to start reading Chapter 2 of the Gulag Archipelago, and it's called The History of Our Sewage Disposal System. And I bet you can guess they're not actually talking about the sewer. When people today decree the abuses of the cult, they keep getting hung up on those years which are stuck in our throats, 37 and 38. And memory begins to make it seem as though arrests were never made before or after, but only in those 2 years. Although I have no statistics at hand, I am not afraid of erring when I say that the wave of 1937 and 1938 was neither the only one nor even the main one, but only one, perhaps one of the 3 biggest waves which strained the murky, stinking pipes of our prison sewers to bursting. Before it came the wave of 1929 and 1930. And folks, when they're talking about a wave, they're talking about a wave of arrests. When something happened, when the new formed government came and decided to get rid of a certain percentage of people because of a certain thing. And we're going to talk about that as we go through. And that's something Trump supporters have to think about. Tea Party supporters have to think about. People that aren't supportive of the political agenda of LGBTQ. You can support their right to believe what they want without supporting their political agenda. And people in these groups, they get categorized and arrests start happening. They happened once upon a time, and they'll happen again if we allow a coup to occur. So let's keep reading here. Before it came, the wave of 1929 and 1930, the size of a good river Ab, which drove a mere 15 million peasants. And when we talk about peasants, ladies and gentlemen, if you make less than $300,000 a year, and I know that's a big number to a lot of us, it's a huge number even to me, to you, to most people, but if you make less than $300,000 a year, you are a peasant. You are at the lower end of upper class and below. All right. And peasants. All right. The kulak, the peasants, they are the middle class. So remember that if you're a blue collar person, you are a peasant in this reading. So I want you to try to relate yourself to this. I want you to close your eyes while we're going through this and try to put yourself in the shoes of the people I'm talking about, because when we talk about peasants, we are talking about you and I. All right, ladies and gentlemen. So which drove a mere 15 million peasants, maybe even more, out into the taiga. And I hope I don't mispronounce too many of these words, but out into the taiga, I believe it's called the taiga, and the tundra. But peasants are a silent people, without a literary voice, nor do they write complaints or memoirs, nor interrogators sweated out the night with them, nor did they bother to draw up formal indictments. It was enough to have a decree from the village Soviet, the village snitch. This wave poured forth, sank down into the permafrost, and even our most active minds recall hardly a thing about it. It is as if it had not even scarred the Russian conscience. And when Stalin, and you and I as well, committed no crime more heinous than this. So what he's saying is, as he's recalling what happens, it's almost as if time has made people forget. It's deep into the permafrost, deep into memory. So even Stalin, even the people that committed atrocities, nobody is at fault anymore because people are forgetting. So, and after it there was the wave of 1944 to 1946, the size of a good Yenisei, when they dumped the whole nations down the sewer pipes, not to mention millions and millions of others who, because of us, had been prisoners of war, were carried off to Germany and subsequently repatriated. So what he's saying there, when they said dumped the whole nations down the sewer pipes, all the people that didn't stand up, that didn't do the right thing, that were responsible for flushing their country down the toilet. That's what that says. All right, guys, this was Stalin's method of cauterizing the wounds so that scar tissue would form more quickly, and thus the body politic as a whole would not have to rest up, catch its breath, regain its strength. But in this wave, too, the people were of simpler kind, and they wrote no memoirs. So many people died, so many people disappeared, that no memory exists of. They wrote nothing about them. But the wave of 1937 swept up. And by the way, if you're listening to this and you're not watching, I'm sorry for the guys watching, the gals watching, everybody watching. If you're listening to this, I'm kind of going between the book and myself. So you're going to have to do a little bit of differentiating what is in the book and what is not. So if you're a professional and you think that I'm just narrating or something and you're going, hey, that's not in the book, you can go kick the bricks, because I really don't care, because that's not what we're doing. So anyway, back to the book. But the wave of 1937 swept up and carried off to the archipelago people of position, people with a party past, yes, educated people, around whom were many who had been wounded and remained in the cities. The people that didn't flee when this started happening, that thought, I'll be okay. Nothing will happen. It's not going to get crazy. And what a lot of them had pen in hand, and today they are all writing, they're speaking, they're remembering. 1937, a whole Volga of people's grief. but just say 1937 to a Crimean Tatar, a Kalmyk, a Chechen, and he'll shrug his shoulders. And what's 1937 to Leningrad when 1935 had come before it? What he's talking about is that so many atrocities happened in so many different parts of their gigantic country that what happened in 1937 to one people is nothing compared to what happened in 1935 or 1949 to another part. You know, back then they didn't have the internet, news didn't travel around as much. And today with the modern censorship, do you really think news is traveling any better? We're not hearing the whole story, right? And they didn't either. So let's keep reading here. And for the second termers or people from the Baltic countries, weren't 1948 and 1949 harder on them? And if sticklers for style and geography could accuse me of having omitted some Russian rivers and of not yet having named some of the waves, and just give me enough paper, there were enough waves to use up the names of all the rivers of Russia. He's talking about how emotional it is and how it's swelling up. He's using the analogy of waves, but he's talking about, and he's using water, but he's talking about the millions of people, the millions of voices that weren't heard. And it's a powerful, powerful emotion inside of him. And he's trying to express it here by saying this. It is well known that any organ withers away if it is not used. Therefore, we know that the Soviet security organ, or organs as they christened themselves with this vile word, praised and exalted some of all us, exalted above all living things, have not died off, even to the extent of one single tentacle, but instead have grown new ones and strengthened their muscles. It is easy to deduce that they have had constant exercise. And he's talking about the organizations that work towards harming the people and how they got stronger. And think about that when you hear about Biden wanting to negotiate with Antifa, with Black Lives Matter, with groups that have changed definitions of words to confuse and distract us, all the while working out their diabolical plot, their Marxist socialist plot, their Stalin-like, their Lenin-like, their Soviet-like takeover. And when we read this stuff and they talk about Soviet security organs, they're talking about groups like Antifa that eventually maybe became government organizations. Now, I'm not being exact, but those type of things did happen, and they did get constant exercise, and they do grow. And what happens today when you bend the knee to Antifa? They just get more powerful. And the same goes for Black Lives Matter and all of the other groups out there that practice supremacy, that practice racism, that practice bigotry. And we know those groups do. So that was an important explanation. Sorry, you're going to get a couple of those throughout this. And so let's keep going. Through the sewer pipes, the flow pulsed. Sometimes the pressure was higher than had been projected, sometimes lower, but the prison sewers were never empty. The blood, the sweat, and the urine into which we were pulsed through them continuously. The history of this sewage system is the history of an endless swallow and flow, flood alternating with ebb, and ebb again with flood, waves pouring in, some big, some small, brooks and rivulets flowing in from all sides, trickles oozing in through the gutters, and then just plain individually scooped up droplets. The chronological list which follows, in which waves made up of millions of arrested persons are given equal attention with ordinary streamlets of unremarkable handfuls, is quite incomplete, meager, miserly, and limited by my own capacity to penetrate the past. What is really needed is a great deal of additional work by survivors familiar with the material. So what he's talking about is that the things they didn't expect, the things they didn't see, the things that happened that took millions and millions of lives, there were so many more that they just don't know about. Even this book that goes through the millions that it goes through all of the atrocities. It talks about all of the horrors that we couldn't even imagine in certain parts of this book. It doesn't even scratch the surface of the things we just don't know. And think about that compared to what's happening right now when they're trying to change history, erase our document, change our school systems, make it mandatory to snitch on people, snitch on your parents, mandatory lockdowns, all of these different things that are designed to bring us closer and closer to this type of material that I'm going through right now. And it's strikingly similar. It's absolutely startling. And like I said, we're going to go through this and you're going to keep seeing how eerie and how horrifying it is. Now, we're not going to do the entire chapter. It's about 4 hours to do the entire chapter, but I'm going to get you through just enough to get my point across. All right, ladies and gentlemen. So let's keep going. In compiling this list, the most difficult thing is to begin, partly because the further back into the decades one goes, the fewer the eyewitnesses who are left, and therefore the light of common knowledge has gone out and darkness has set in, and the written chronicles either do not exist or are kept under lock and key, censored, hidden, locked away, ladies and gentlemen. Also, it is not entirely fair to consider in a single category the especially brutal years of the Civil War and the first years of peacetime, when mercy might have been expected. You see, they went through a civil war too, and it's something you can look up and read about, ladies and gentlemen. But even before there was any civil war, it could be seen that Russia, due to the makeup of its population, was obviously not suited for any sort of socialism whatsoever. The United States isn't suited for socialism either, ladies and gentlemen. It was totally polluted. One of the first blows of the dictatorship was directed against the cadets, the members of the Constitutional Democratic Party. Under the Tsar, they had constituted the most dangerous ranks of revolution, and under the government of the proletariat, they represented the most dangerous ranks of reaction. At the end of November 1917, on the occasion of the first scheduled convening of the Constituent Assembly, which did not take place, the Cadet Party was outlawed, and arrests of its members began. At about the same time, people associated with the Alliance for the Constituent Assembly and the students enrolled in the Soldiers' University were being thrown in the jug. So what happens? What would you do when you start seeing that the left has outlawed a certain type of officers, say in the military, and they start arresting them, throwing them in the brig, throwing them in solitary confinement just because they were associated with those officers or just because they were associated with that part of the military? What if they started doing that to special operations folks, just arresting Navy SEALs because they were associated with people like that had values that the left might say and claim are, oppressive, like being a self-starter or wanting to have a wife or a husband and 2 or 3 kids in a normal family, or live in the suburbs? I mean, what if they started arresting you for that? You have to think about that while we're reading this, ladies and gentlemen, because these folks that supported the Alliance for the Constituent Assembly and the students that were even enrolled in the universities for the soldiers there, they were thrown into the jug. Knowing the sense and spirit of the revolution, it is easy to guess that during these months, such central prisons as Kresty in Petrograd and the Butyurki, the Butyurki in Moscow, and many provincial prisons like them were filled with wealthy men, prominent public figures, generals and officers, as well as officials of ministries and of the state apparatus who refused to carry out the orders of the new authority. What happens if they steal the election And what happens if Kamala Harris takes over? And what happens, ladies and gentlemen, if they start putting people like Dinesh D'Souza in prison, Dan Bongino in prison? What happens if they put me in prison? What happens if they drag Jim Jordan out of his bedroom at 3 a.m. and put a black bag over his head and throw him into an unmarked van? As we've seen, the CIA and FBI seem to be complacent with leftist overthrow, with leftist coups. So any of this could happen. What if Matt Gaetz was beaten by a SWAT team and dragged out of his house at 3 a.m., thrown into a van, never to be seen again, lost into an American gulag? These things can happen, ladies and gentlemen. So if I'm losing you, stay with me. This is important data, folks. So let's keep going. One of the first operations of the Cheka was to arrest the entire committee of all Russian unions of employees. One of the first circulars of the NKVD in December 1917 stated, in view of sabotage by officials, use maximum initiatives in localities, not excluding confiscations, compulsion, and arrests. So what they're saying is, if you find people that are on this list, and you know how the left is enjoying talking about compiling lists of Trump supporters and compiling lists of people that need to go to re-education and need to have their values questioned because they were Trump supporters. Remember what they're saying here, which happened in 1917, in view of sabotage by officials. If they think that you have committed a crime, which they have created as the new overlords, use maximum initiative. Use the most you have to use to get them to cooperate. So what does that say here? Not excluding confiscations. Take their land, take their property, take their stuff, take their clothes, take their family away. Compulsion. Beat them. Beat the crap out of them. Lie to them. Tell them you're going to hurt their family. Threaten them. That's compulsion, ladies and gentlemen. And arrests. Finally, lock them up and throw away the key. And even though V.I. Lenin, at the end of 1917, in order to establish strictly revolutionary order, demanded merciless suppression of attempts at anarchy on the part of drunkards, hooligans, counter-revolutionaries, and other persons. In other words, he foresaw that drunkards and hooligans represented the principal danger to the October Revolution, which, with counter-revolutionaries somewhere back in third place, he nonetheless put the problem more broadly. So in his essay, How to Organize the Competition, from January 7 and 10, 1918, V.I. Lenin proclaimed the common united purpose of purging the Russian land of all kinds of harmful insects. Ladies and gentlemen. So what they're saying is some of these framers of this socialist ideology from back then, guys, they believed that people had to be purged from the get-go. All right. You hear people on the fringes of the left screaming for people to be arrested, for people to be removed, for people to have the key thrown away and never to be seen again. Don't tell me you don't see it, because I see it. And you're not stupid, and I'm not stupid, and we see it. So this is absolutely terrifying. Like I said in the beginning of this podcast, or, this episode, this video, whatever you want to call it, because I'm not officially making this a podcast. I'm just putting it out as a video. But I said at the beginning, this fireplace could represent an oven or a cozy fireplace, depending on what direction we choose. Trump winning leads to a cozy fireplace. Joe Biden leads to the Gulag Archipelago. And as I keep reading this, you're going to see more and more, again, how this relates. I mean, it's just startling, but you have to look back in history to understand the choices that need to be made in the future so that you don't make the same mistakes. It's like a child being told by their parent. And how many times have you said to your child something, or you were told when you were a kid, hey, I made a mistake in the past. Don't do this. Don't repeat my mistake. If you repeat it, the same thing's going to happen to you. And the kid or yourself, when you were a dumb young one, I know I was a dumb young one, we didn't listen and we made the mistake, and then we had to suffer the consequences because we just didn't listen. So now it's time to listen, because if we don't listen to history, we're doomed to make the same horrible, horrible mistakes, ladies and gentlemen. So let's keep reading. Under the term insects, he included not only all class enemies. Remember, they take over, and let's just say Black Lives Matter says you're an enemy. You didn't support them. You didn't put their banner on your wall. You didn't put the Star of David in the window, if you know what I mean. So now you are a harmful insect. So all class enemies, workers malingering at your work. You slack at work, ladies and gentlemen, under socialism, might get arrested. For example, the typesetters of the Petrograd party printing shops. This is what time does. It is difficult for us nowadays to understand how workers who had just become dictators were immediately inclined to malinger at work they were doing for themselves. When it's for yourself, Interesting point. And then again, in what block of a big city, in what factory, in what village are there not saboteurs who call themselves intellectuals? True, the forms of insect purging, which Lenin conceived of in this essay, were most varied. In some places, they would be placed under arrest. This is the intellectuals they're talking about. Think about the intellectuals we know. Ben Shapiro, Dinesh D'Souza is an intellectual. Even General Flynn is an intellectual. And you know what they did to him. So all of the people at the Wisdom Tower, well, there's a couple more of them. I can't think of them off the top of my head, and I don't want to waste too much of your time. The Brett Weinsteins, that was the name I was thinking of. The Brett Weinsteins that predicted all of this happening. They too read this. They too understand what is happening, and they are intellectuals, and they are some of the first that were considered insects that needed to be arrested. So let's read. Insect purging, which Lenin conceived of in this essay, were most varied. So, in some places, they would be placed under arrest. In other places, set to cleaning latrines. In some, after having served their time in punishment cells, they would be handed yellow tickets. In others, parasites would be shot. Elsewhere, you could take your pick of imprisonment or punishment at forced labor of the hardest kind, even though he perceived and suggested the basic directions punishment should take. Vladimir Ilyich proposed that communes and communities should compete with each other. Think about that. That would be like towns and cities, little hovels around your neighborhood here should compete with each other on how to best purge society of these unwanted individuals, folks. It's not possible for us at this time to fully investigate exactly who fell within the broad definition of insects. The population of Russia was too heterogeneous and encompassed small, special groups, entirely I always mess this word up. Superfluous. There we go. Superfluous. God, I suck today. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen. And today, forgotten, the people in the local zemstvo, self-governing bodies in the provinces were, of course, insects. People in the cooperative movement were also insects, as were owners of their own home. Remember what I talked about peasants earlier? Middle-class folks? Do you own a house? Right now, think about it. Do you own a house? Well, you're considered an insect to Mr. Lenin, the mastermind of one of these great socialist movements. There were not a few insects among the teachers in the gymnasiums. The church parish councils were made up almost exclusively of insects, and it was insects, of course, who sang in the church choirs. All priests were insects, and monks and nuns more so, and all those Tolstoyans who, when they undertook to serve the Soviet government on, for example, the railroads, refused to sign the required oath to defend the Soviet government with gun in hand, thereby showed themselves to be insects too. All these different classes of people who didn't comply or were seen unworthy by this new regime, they were considered expendable. They were considered insects. They needed to be disposed of, ladies and gentlemen. The railroads were particularly important, for there were indeed many insects hidden beneath railroad uniforms, and they had to be rooted out. and some of them slapped down, and telegraphers, for some reason, were, for the most part, invertebrate insects who had no sympathy for the Soviets, nor could you say a good word about Vixel, the all-Russian Executive Committee of the Union of Railroad Workers, nor about the other trade unions, which were often filled with insects hostile to the working class. So what they're getting at, what he's saying is anybody and everybody could be considered a criminal. So I know that was a bunch of stuff about insects and all these different people and some Russian words and crap that's not understandable. But what you need to mine out of that paragraph is it doesn't matter who you are or what you supported or what you did. If you fall into a group, just like that critical race theory stuff says, where you don't have to be a racist to have racism in your blood because it was something that's traditional. It's something that came through the ages that is related to your class. It's the same thing out of this. Just because you have a certain profession or certain belief or certain view, you are considered an insect. You are considered a criminal. You will be considered persona non grata. And that is what they're trying to start programming into our society. That's what they've been programming into our kids. It's right here in these paragraphs, ladies and gentlemen. Again, when I'm reading this, for some of you, you're going to tune out. This is going to be really blah, 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 blah. But I'm telling you, the knowledge is here. The information you need to understand what the left intends to do to us is in these pages. All right, folks? So just those groups we have so far enumerated represented an enormous number of people, several years worth of purge activity. In addition, how many kinds of cursed intellectuals there were, restless students, and a variety of eccentrics, truth seekers, and holy fools of whom even Peter the Great had tried in vain to purge Russia, and who are always a hindrance to a well-ordered, strict regime. So when he talks about truth seekers and eccentrics, he's talking about people like Steven Crowder, like Dan Bongino, like Dinesh D'Souza, like me. I mean, anybody that is speaking out in such a way is considered one of these cursed intellectuals, all right, which in a freer time would never have disappeared. But when the socialists come for their lunch, when they have to justify what they're doing, when they have to sell their lies, some of these people have to disappear. That's the best way I can really put it. They become roadblocks to the lies. The lies have to go out unfettered. And as long as people open their mouth and speak the truth, the lies cannot get out and really disseminate to a point of really full control. So it's very important that we keep speaking, ladies and gentlemen. It's very important. It would have been impossible to carry out this hygienic purging, especially under wartime conditions, if they had had to follow outdated legal processes and normal judicial procedures. So think about this right now. We went through this. You can call it a fake pandemic, a real pandemic. I know it does hurt certain people. Old people did get affected by COVID, so let's not go too crazy with that rabbit hole. I will say it's not as bad as they say it is, but what it did do is it opened a door for this. Think about it. It would have been impossible to carry out this hygienic purging, especially under wartime conditions, if they had had to follow outdated legal processes and normal judicial procedures. They didn't have to follow normal procedures because something was going on. Something changed those procedures. There was a way to get around those procedures. And if you look at a lot of states, that's what the governments have tried to do. They've used COVID to circumvent the normal system that would normally protect against these type of horrible and radical movements. And that's a big reason we're seeing some of that right now. And so an entirely new form was adopted, extrajudicial reprisal, and this thankless job was self-sacrificingly assumed by the Cheka, the sentinel of the revolution, which was the only punitive organ in human history that combined in one set of hands. Think of this. All right, guys, think about this. This is what the Cheka is. In one set of hands, All right. Investigation, arrest, interrogation, prosecution, trial, and execution of the verdict. So you have one organization, not these branches that we have here, these different checks and balances, these different pathways for freedom and fairness, not what we have here, but what they had after they were taken over, after the revolution, after socialism sunk its claws in. And not because they've had socialism, but not the type of socialism like we're trying to fight off right now. That's what they started experiencing during this time, that real evil version of socialism, that power hungry version of socialism. Okay, guys, it really makes this a horrible, horrible thing. All right. This checkup, they were able to, like, imagine this. Imagine if the cops showed up at your house and the cops were able to put you in jail, and then the cops were able to hold your trial, and then the cops made a judgment, and then if they sentenced you to death, they took you out behind the police station and shot you in the head. I'm not saying that that's what cops do. I support the police, so before you go crazy, don't relate that example. But that's what was happening here. They were controlled. This was an entire organization controlled by the socialists that were cleansing people, ladies and gentlemen, through arrest, through unlawful arrest, because they were persona non grata. They were the people that opposed them. They were the people that they deemed unclean, that they were anti-racist towards, if you know what I mean, with all of the crap that's going around now. So let's keep reading. In 1918, in order to speed up the cultural victory of the revolution as well, they began to ransack the churches. All right. Imagine the left's taken over. You've seen what's happening in New York. You've seen what they're doing with churches. All right. With the Orthodox Jews. All right. They ransacked the churches. They threw out the relics and the saints. They carried off the church plate. All right. They're destroying history and stealing the money. Popular disorders broke out in defense of the plundered churches and monasteries. Here and there, the alarm bells rang out, and the true Orthodox believers rushed forth, some of them with clubs. Naturally, some had to be expended right on the spot, and others arrested. So that's what jackboots means. When you hear the left talking about jackboots and militant government people and dictators, what happens if the left steals, all right? If they steal the election, what happens if Biden comes in? What happens if we go more and more towards socialism? What happens if they close the churches? They condemn the buildings. They steal the relics. What happens if we fight back and they start killing their own citizens? This is no joke. It's happened many times in history, just as recently as here, and we are on that path. Again, if we don't fight with everything in our hearts to be digital soldiers and First Amendment utilizers, and speak up for Donald Trump, speak up for the right, and speak out against this left-wing ideology, because this is where we go, ladies and gentlemen. This is where we go. There's also no little difficulty in deciding whether we should classify among the prison waves or on the balance sheets of the Civil War those tens of thousands of hostages, i.e. people not personally accused of anything, those peaceful citizens not even listed by name who were taken off and destroyed simply to terrorize or wreak vengeance on a military enemy or a rebellious population. After August 30th, 1918, the NKVD ordered the localities to arrest immediately all right socialist revolutionaries and to take a significant number of hostages from the bourgeoisie and military officers. And if you're middle class, you're part of the bourgeoisie. You are a peasant, ladies and gentlemen. All right. So, look, we're going to skip a little bit ahead, because this is a big chapter. I was telling you folks, I don't want to make this a 9-hour thing. And for some of you, I'm sure this is already dragging on. But what I'm trying to get across to you is that when you see the left go on TV and they talk about making lists, right? And they talk about taking down people for not tribunals per se, but kind of gatherings where you have to admit your mistakes. truth and reconciliation gatherings, things like that. That is the precursor to arrests. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, what we're going through right now is not something that hasn't been done before in other places in the world. And it's not something that is unfamiliar to this realm. This is an ancient evil we're talking about. This idea that hasn't faded since the inception of it, this belief that by controlling the masses, you can bring them happiness because you apparently think you know what happiness is. Folks, socialism leads to doom every single time. So I want to skip a little bit forward, all right, and start reading here. In the same year, the practice of arresting students began. For example, the group of Yevgenia Doyerenko in the Timiryazev Academy, pardon my Russian, I'll do the best I can, for criticism of the system, not in public, merely a conversation among themselves. What they're saying is these folks that went to the school had a conversation among themselves where they criticized the system. They criticized what was going on in the government, and that was enough to arrest them. That's what happens when they get rid of the First Amendment here. You get arrested for using your free speech. Such cases, however, were evidently few because the group in question was interrogated by Menjinsky and Yagoda personally. Also, in 1921, the arrests of members of the all non-Bolshevik parties were expanded and systematized. In fact, all Russia's political parties had been buried except the victorious one. Oh, do not dig a grave for someone else. And so that the dissolution of these parties would be irreversible, it was necessary that their members should disintegrate and their physical bodies too. So they got rid of these groups, they got rid of their members, murdered these people, made it all go away so that nobody could bring any of it back and challenge the ultimate authority of the socialist government. Not one citizen of the former Russian state who had ever joined a party other than the Bolshevik party could avoid his fate. He was condemned unless, like Maysky and Vyshinsky, he succeeded in making his way across the planks of the wreck to the Bolsheviks. He might not be arrested in the first group. He might live on, depending on how dangerous he was believed to be, until 1922, 1932, or even 1937, but the lists were kept. His turn would and did come. He was arrested or else politely invited to an interrogation where he was asked just one question. Had he been a member of such and such from then till then? There were also questions about hostile activity, but the first question decided everything, as is clear to us now, decades later. So what they're saying is, even if they promised you that nothing would happen to you, even if you had joined the new Bolshevik socialist type party, even if you condemned the ways of your past and were all about getting into this new revolution, this new Bolshevik way of life, it didn't matter. You were considered a threat, and at some point they would arrest you and you would either die or be in prison for a long time. And so you were punished for the past, regardless of what your current beliefs are. Now think about that. Think about what the left is trying to do, ladies and gentlemen. Think about how they're punishing people for things that happened so long ago. People are getting canceled. People are being put on lists. People are becoming persona non grata, and eventually people will get arrested for it if we allow this to happen, folks. From there on, his fate might vary. Some were put immediately in one of the famous Tsarist central prisons. Fortunately, all of the socialists even ended up in the very same cells. Oh, wait, I messed up. Fortunately, all of the Tsarist central prisons had been well preserved, and some socialists even ended up in the very same cells as with the very same jailers they had before. Others were offered the opportunity of going into exile. And before we continue, let me talk about that really quick, what it just said. It said that some people found themselves back in jail, but this time sharing a cell with the person that put them in jail in the first place. Nobody was safe. And if the left takes over, nobody is safe, ladies and gentlemen. So, let's see. Others were offered the opportunity of going into exile. Oh, though, not for long, just for 2 or 3 years, and some had it even easier. They were merely given a minus. A certain number of cities were forbidden and told to pick out a new place of residence themselves, and for the future, would they please be so kind as to stay fixed in that one place and await the pleasure of the GPU. So just go live in that city. Don't be in this city, and you'll be safe there, right? That's what they'll say. You'll be safe there. Nothing will happen to you. It'll be fine. Just wait on us. Just trust us. Just trust your new masters. This whole operation was stretched out over many years because it was of primary importance that it be stealthy and unnoticed. It was essential to clean out, conscientiously, socialists of every other stripe, from Moscow, Petrograd, the ports, the industrial centers, and later on, the outlying provinces as well. So they're cleansing other socialists. They're cleansing all types of people. But think about that. Think about if Antifa or Black Lives Matter took over, if a candidate supported them and gave them so much power and the left adopted their ideology, which they are. They're adopting the critical race theory that Joe Biden wants to reinstill. They want to legalize 11 million illegal aliens within the first 100 days, full amnesty. They want to do all of these things that will bring this forth. And what happens? It's stretched out, just like it says here. The whole operation was stretched out over many years because it was of primary importance that it be stealthy and unnoticed. What do you think the Democrats are doing, ladies and gentlemen? It was essential to clean out all of these people that opposed them. What do you think they're going to do? They have to become pure. They had to clean out everybody. They will clean out all of the opposing parties from Moscow, from Seattle, right? From Petrograd, from Oregon, Portland, right? From the ports, what is that, San Diego maybe? San Francisco maybe? The industrial centers, are we talking Chicago? When we say that right there, and later on the outlying provinces, let's go look at Alabama, let's look at Florida, let's look at Kentucky. When it's time to cleanse these areas of our people, we can't allow that to happen. We can't even allow that. It can't even be a thought, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, it could never happen. We are speculating, of course, but history does not lie. So the human beings have the potential for this type of evil, and the perfect storm has been brewing. So we are defending not just the freedom of the world against this great reset, but honestly, the future of this country. Ladies and gentlemen, the future of the United States. So let's keep reading. This was a grandiose, silent game of solitaire whose rules were totally incomprehensible to its contemporaries. Think about what they do. Think about what the left does, what Black Lives Matter does, what Antifa does with redefining the rules, changing the rules of the election. These rhinos in Georgia, these corrupt Democrats in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, changing the rules of an election so that we, the common people, the contemporaries, we don't understand. It's incomprehensible what the powerful are doing because we don't understand, because the definitions, again, have been changed, and whose outlines we can appreciate only now. Someone's far-seeing mind, someone's neat hands planned it all. Without letting one wasted minute go by, they picked up a card which had spent 3 years in one pile and softly placed it in another pile. And what they're talking about, ladies and gentlemen, they are talking about how what happened couldn't have been coincidence, just like what happens right now. What is happening in this country, in the United States, is not a coincidence. It is a slow-moving, meticulously designed plot, plan and process. It is not random. It is not seeping in like a virus, though it seems that way because it is intended to be that way. This is a well thought out coup to bring forth socialism to support the Great Reset. All you have to do is Google Build Back Better. You'll see exactly what I'm talking about, and even blue check marks and gold badges out there will agree with me, ladies and gentlemen. And so, by the way, before we keep reading, I do have to ask you, speaking of blue check marks and gold badges, I am not a blue check mark or a gold badge. I work my tail off. I'm a veteran. I work a full-time job. I'm also a PhD student. I have children. I have a wife. I have a family, and I do not sleep a lot. So this company that I'm building, the American Reveille, we are trying to eventually create livelihoods for people, and we want to get the real source of information out to the patriots so that you can use it to weaponize the truth in this fight versus evil. We have a fight, good versus evil, and we have to weaponize the truth. But I have to upgrade. We have to keep building this company, and it requires a little bit of help. And since I don't sell anything at the moment, since we are building trust, we are building community, and we are not for profit, I ask you, if you can, do me a favor. If you really like what we're doing, if you support this work, take a trip over to www.americanreveille.com. That's www.americanreveille.com, and you'll see at the top on the right, there's a bar there that says donate. Even if you can give us 50 cents, anything, it's going to go towards upgrading our equipment. I need new cables. I need new mics. I need a new computer here for better processing and rendering. We have more writers coming on board every day, more videos coming out. We're expanding and scaling, and we really need to pay for some of these costs. And right now I pay for every single thing out of my own pocket with the money that I make at work. So anything helps. And again, you don't have to. This is not a requirement. I am on a purpose here. I'm on a mission to get you this information. So whether you do that or not, I still want you here. I appreciate you here, and you are a patriot fighting the good fight. So remember, www.americanreveille, that's REVEILLE.com, upper right hand corner, and the donate button's really easy. It'll take you to PayPal, and you could put a custom amount if you just want to give us $1. I greatly appreciate it, folks. So let's get back to this. All right, guys. So we talked about the operation here. We're talking about this chess game that's going on. All right. And they're revealing in this Gulag Archipelago in chapter 2, and we're on page 35 for anybody who's following along with their own copy. They're revealing this well planned out, meticulous plan. And when you look at people like Ibram Kendi, you look at people like the three Marxists that created Black Lives Matter, you look at the Pelosi's of the world, the Bidens of the world, the crackhead Hunter Bidens of the world. These things are not coincidence. There are deep-rooted, deep-seated plans and plots out there, and they are playing out like a giant Game of Thrones right now, ladies and gentlemen. So, with that, I want to keep going just a little further here. Let's see. Patience. Overwhelming patience was the trait of the person playing out the solitaire, and without any noise, without any outcry, the members of all the other parties slipped gradually out of sight. They lost all connection with the places and the people where they and their revolutionary activities were known. And remember, when they say revolutionary, they're talking about anything that they deemed revolutionary. So if the left took over and say AOC became the freaking president one day, God forbid, let's just say she decided to start doing this. And by the way, I could totally see her as like a dictator-like character, just standing up there with her glasses, pounding her fist, rah! I could totally see her like a character, like Chancellor Adam Sutler from V for Vendetta. She would be Chancellor AOC from somewhere in New York at a bar. So anyway, let's talk about this. So, and thus Imperceptibly and mercilessly was prepared the annihilation of those who had once raged against tyranny at student meetings and had clanked their czarist shackles in pride. In this game of the big solitaire, the majority of the old political prisoners, survivors of hard labor, were destroyed, for it was primarily the SRs and the anarchists, not the social democrats, who had received the harshest sentences from the czarist courts. They, in particular, had made up the population of the czarist hard labor political prisons. There was justice in the priorities of destruction. However, in 1920, they were all offered the chance to renounce in writing their parties and party ideologies. Some declined, and they naturally came up first for annihilation. Others signed such renunciations and thereby added a few years to their lifetime, but their turn too came implacably, and their heads rolled implacably from their shoulders. Folks, basically, when they take over, they lash out at everybody that they ever perceived were against them. So in this case, the Democratic Socialists bought themselves some more time. Other people admitted things that they wanted them to admit or were coerced into admitting things, and they bought themselves time. But in the end, they were all killed. Because when you're trying to make a perfect society, basically, there are going to be people that you don't consider perfect. And those people that you don't consider perfect need to disappear somehow. And it starts with shunning them. Then it goes to imprisonment. And then it goes to annihilation. That's just the normal way of things, unfortunately. And that's what we are trying to fight against. So there was justice in the priorities of destruction. I said that already. In the spring of 1922, the Extraordinary Commission for Struggle Against Counter-Revolution, Sabotage, and Speculation, the Cheka, recently renamed the GPU, decided to intervene in the church affairs. So now government and church are fighting. It was called on to carry out a church revolution to remove the existing leadership and replace it with one which would have only one ear turned to heaven and the other to the Lubyanka, the so-called living church. People seemed to go along with this plan, but without outside help, they could not gain control of the church apparatus. So the government's trying to infiltrate the church, which at the time had a huge impact on people, and it could control and sway people's decisions and feelings. So they were trying to infiltrate the church. And we see this today with the left even denouncing the church. We see the Pope now siding with lockdowns and terrorism. So we see different churches having been infiltrated, and we see other churches being denounced, and we see heathens and basically what you could consider demons of people rising from the dregs of life and spreading their wicked ideologies around for our children to absorb. I mean, it's pretty nasty stuff that we're seeing right now, and it relates to what's happening in this book, folks. Here and there in the provincial centers and even further down in the administrative districts, metropolitans and bishops were arrested, and, as always, in the wake of the big fish followed shells of smaller fry, archpriests, monks, and deacons. Those arrests were not even reported in the press. Their press was censored and lying too, ladies and gentlemen. They also arrested those who refused to swear to support the living church renewal movement, something disguised with a fancy name here, something horrifying disguised in plain sight. I wonder what now is disguised in plain sight from the left that could have horrifying things happening behind the scenes, ladies and gentlemen. Men of religion were an inevitable part of every annual catch, and their silver locks gleamed in every cell and in every prisoner transport en route to the Solovetsky Islands. From the early 20s on, arrests were also made among groups of theosophists, mystics and spiritualists. Count Palin's group used to keep official transcripts of the communications with the spirit world. also religious societies and philosophers of the Berdyaev circle, the so-called Eastern Catholics, followers of Vladimir Solovyev, were arrested and destroyed in passing, as was the group of AI Abrikosova, and of course ordinary Roman Catholics. Polish Catholic priests, etc. were arrested too as part of the normal course of events. So they started cleansing people of different religions, ladies and gentlemen. However, the root of destruction of religion in the country, which throughout the 20s and 30s was one of the most important goals of the GPU, the former Cheka, the combined GPU, NKVD, all of these acronyms I've been using, which are just government entities, could be realized only by mass arrests of Orthodox believers, ladies and gentlemen. Mass arrests of Orthodox believers, monks and nuns, whose black habits had been a distinctive feature of old Russian life, were intensively rounded up on every hand, placed under arrest, and sent into exile. They arrested and sentenced active laymen. Ladies and gentlemen, you saw in New York, they tried to do that with the Orthodox Jews, and the Supreme Court told Andrew Cuomo to go F himself. So thank God for that. This is an active fight we're in, folks. We are fighting it across every state in this great country, and the world is looking to us. The circles kept getting bigger, and they raked in ordinary believers as well, old people, and particularly women, who were the most stubborn believers, and who for many long years to come would be called nuns in transit prisons and in camps. True, they were supposedly being arrested and tried not for their actual faith, but for openly declaring their convictions and for bringing up their children in the same spirit. They were in trouble because they spoke up, and what they had to say was different than what the government had to say. And because they didn't teach their children the way the government wanted them to be taught, they were thrown in prison. That is what this is telling you. The first part of things I reviewed and read to you, even though it was long and a little bit dry, it was meant to show you all of the arrests that could spring from the left taking over, from the left stealing. And the second part that I just got through is supposed to show you that even for your religion, even for your beliefs, even for teaching your children the things that you believe in, that you find holy, you could be arrested and killed, made to disappear, never seen again. As it says here in the book, you can pray freely, but just so God alone can hear. And that's what the left wants, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit more. We're only going about 57 pages in, and we're on page 45 here, and we are skipping around a little bit. So don't worry too much. We're going to get through this, and then I'm going to make my major point at the end, and you can take this information and do what you want with it. Though I hope you will spread it around, because knowledge is power. And on the right, where we are right now, we need as much power and as much weaponry as we can get. And that doesn't lie in physical armament, though I know we have the advantage there, so I'm not too worried about it. It's mental armament. It's intellectual armament. We need to be wiser, smarter, faster, stealthier, speedier, wittier. We need to have a mouth, and we need to use it, but we can't be peddling fake crap. We can speculate based on critical theory or critical deduction based upon logic, but we can't be lying about stuff like the left does. So it pays to get informed. And I'll tell you right now, like I've said a billion times, I always respect street smarts before book smarts. But I'm going to tell you this right now. If you arm yourself with both street smarts and book smarts, you, my friend, are a lethal weapon. So let's get through the rest of this. This therapy, all right? And we've skipped ahead a little bit. This therapy continued full speed from 1927 on and immediately exposed to the proletariat all the causes of their economic failures and shortages. So they just had something was done where it exposed and showed the government all of the failures in the economy that they were trying to build. There was wrecking in the people's commissariat of railroads. That was why it was hard to get aboard a train, why there were interruptions in supplies. There was wrecking in the Moscow electric power system and interruptions in power. There was wrecking in the oil industry, hence the shortage of kerosene. There was wrecking in textiles, hence nothing for a working man to wear. In the coal industry, there was colossal wrecking, hence no heat. In the metallurgy, defense, machinery, shipbuilding, chemical mining, gold and platinum industries, in irrigation, everywhere there were these pus-filled boils of wrecking. Enemies with slide rules were on all sides. The GPU puffed and panted in its efforts to grab off and drag off the wreckers. In the capitals and in the provinces, GPU collegiums and proletarian courts kept hard at work, sifting through this vicious sewage, and every day the workers gasp and learn, and sometimes didn't even learn, from the papers of these new vile deeds. So think about this, guys. Think about what they're doing in the media back in this time. They're hijacking people's emotions like they're doing right now. They're harnessing all of this negative information, this propaganda that they're creating. They're going for these wreckers, these people that aren't doing anything but have been snitched on, these folks that need to be cleansed from the system, these people that are made to work in these industries because there is no competition, there is no capitalism. These folks are dragged from their jobs, from their beds, from their homes. They're arrested, they're murdered, they're killed, and the people are then told about how many criminals are among them and how they must stay in fear and keep snitching on people. It's a perpetual cycle to keep the socialist dictators in power, ladies and gentlemen, and it's nothing more. They learn about Polinsky, von Meck, and Velichko, and how many others who were nameless. Every industry, every factory, and every handicraft, Artel had to find wreckers in its ranks. They had no choice but to find these people. You had to pick people who might have been innocent, who probably were innocent, and call them out as wreckers. And no sooner had they begun to look than they found them, with the help of the GPU, of course. If any pre-revolutionary engineer was not yet exposed as a traitor, regardless of if he was or not, ladies and gentlemen, then he could certainly be suspected of being one. And what accomplished villains these old engineers were, what diabolical ways to sabotage they had found. Nikolai Karlovich von Meck of the People's Commissariat of Railroads pretended to be terribly devoted to the development of a new economy and would hold forth for hours on end about the economic problems involved in the construction of socialism, and he loved to give advice. One such pernicious piece of advice was to increase the size of freight trains and not worry about heavier than average loads. The GPU exposed von Meck, and he was shot. So imagine if AOC was put in charge of this economy, and imagine if you were running part of that team and you had brought up parts of the plan that weren't right, that were causing things to fail. And then let's say the economy did fail and she wasn't removed from fixing the economy. You were just shot in the head for bringing up her failures. That is what is happening here. People died because they told the truth. And that's why we need to speak the truth as loudly and as clearly and as booming as we can. Because if they take away that right, we will be killed for that right. Because that's what happens time and time again throughout history. Ladies and gentlemen, his objective had been to wear out rails and roadbeds, freight cars and locomotives, so as to leave the Republic without railroads in case of foreign military intervention, when not long afterward, the new People's Commissar of Railroads, this was the person that took over for von Meck, Comrade Kaganovich ordered that average loads should be increased and even doubled and tripled them, and for this discovery received the order of Lenin along with others of our leaders. The malicious engineers who protested became known as limiters. They raised the outcry that this was too much and would result in the breakdown of the rolling stock, and they were rightly shot for their lack of faith in the possibilities of socialist transport. Do you see the hypocrisy in what happened there? Von Meck pretty much wanted to do the same thing, but because of the circumstance of his situation, he was killed for it. And then his replacement, Kaganovich, he did something similar, just in a different route, and they went with it. And then the people who spoke up against Kaganovich, they were killed. Don't you see how that relates to what the left does right now when they go opposite of everything Trump says, or they contradict themselves and they flip-flop back and forth? You never know who's going to be the enemy and who's not going to be the enemy, who's right and who's wrong. And it's all part of how you take over a country with socialism. It's right here in this book. All right. This is the extreme version of it, when what you're seeing right now in the media gets to do what it wants for the next 10 years and becomes this, ladies and gentlemen. He had the same idea that the guy before him had, except the guy before him was killed for it. This guy was praised for it. And then anyone who spoke up against him was killed for it. Folks, come on. You have to see how that goes forth with what's happening right now. They raised the outcry, and this was too much and would result in the breakdown of the rolling stock, and they were rightfully shot for their lack of faith in the possibilities of this new socialist transport. Ladies and gentlemen, these limiters were pursued for several years in all branches of the economy. All branches. It spread like a virus, like we see this ideology spreading right now, to all sectors of the economy, not just the railroad. And they brandished their formulas and calculations and refused to understand that bridges and lathes could respond to the enthusiasm of the personnel. These were the years when all the norms of folk psychology were turned inside out. The circumspect folk wisdom expressed in such a proverb as haste makes waste was ridiculed, and the ancient saying that the slower you go, the farther you'll get was turned inside out. So think about that. This is very, 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 very important. If you get nothing out of what I've done so far, if you've zoned out and you hate this entire video, just pay attention to this right here, all right? These were the years when all the norms of folk psychology were turned inside out. The circumspect folk wisdom expressed in such a proverb as haste makes waste, because we know filling our time more productively leads to better results. We know that the slower you go, the further you get. Taking your time, doing things correctly, planning them out leads to better results. We know that they tore that apart, and we see them doing that. We see Black Lives Matter doing it. We see critical race theory doing it. We see Antifa doing it. We see socialist, leftist, radical, democratic socialists doing it. Bernie Sanders doing it. AOC doing it. Rashida Tlaib doing it. All of these people, these anti-American socialists, are doing this right now. They're saying hard work is a bad thing. They're saying that earning your keep in life is a bad thing. They're saying having a family is a bad thing. They're saying having a father is a bad thing. They're saying standing for something is a bad thing. Equity of outcome. Think about this stuff, ladies and gentlemen. They're saying that people should start off at the same place and end up at the same place. It doesn't matter your ambition or this or that, or how hard you work, or how crappy you are, or whether you're a crack addict, or whether you have an IQ of 160. We should all end up in the same place. That is socialism. That is what they're trying to sell right now. And it's in this book on page 45, if you want to read about it yourself, ladies and gentlemen. The only thing which at times delayed the arrest of the old engineers was the absence of a new batch to take their place. Nikolai Ivanovich Ladizensky, I'll just call it Ladizensky, chief engineer of defense plants in Izhevsk. I'm going to have to get like a Russian translator for me, ladies and gentlemen. I'm so sorry for butchering these words, and I hope it doesn't turn you off too much from this video. Was first arrested for limitation theories and blind faith in safety factors. All right. This guy was coming up with ways to make things safer, and he had faith in safety. All right. It shows here, which explained why he considered inadequate the funds allocated by Ordzhonikidze for factory expansion. This guy, all right, was trying to do the right thing, and he was the chief engineer of the defense plants, and he was arrested for this because it went against the government doctrine, don't you see? Then they put him under house arrest and ordered him back to work in his old job. Without him, the work was collapsing, of course. He put it back in shape, but the funds allocated were just as inadequate and as they had been earlier. And so once again, he was thrown in prison, but this time for the incorrect use of funds. They literally are wrong and throwing him in jail for being right multiple times. They said he used the funds wrong. The funds were insufficient, ladies and gentlemen. They charged because the chief engineer had used them inefficiently, even though they were just not enough. We know this for a fact. He then died in camp after a year of timbering. You want to know what timbering is, ladies and gentlemen? Let's go into the cold and work 3,000-hour days cutting down trees and try not to freeze to death while they barely feed you. That's the type of re-education camp that comes later on, ladies and gentlemen. That's the type of thing that people like AOC are speaking up for. That's what CNN advocates. That's what Fox News, since it's sold out to the mainstream, advocates. Ladies and gentlemen, this is no joke. Folks, this is no joke. Not at all. Let's move forward just a little bit more here. I want to skip over to right over here. All right. Then in February 1932, again in Leningrad, many churches were closed simultaneously, while at the same time large-scale arrests were made among the clergy. This is like a lockdown, ladies and gentlemen. And that's what they would do. They would shut down portions of society and then come in the night and make people disappear. This is where this leads, folks. So there were still more dates and places, and they hadn't been reported to us by anyone, which means that this happened, but obviously this happened to many, many more people that they actually know about. You know, we know about the millions that died under Russian and Soviet rule, but it really is up in the hundreds of millions. We just don't have the records. They controlled those records. They destroyed many of those records, if there were ever any records. And that's, I mean, guys, we are trying to make sure things like this do not happen here in the United States. Non-Orthodox sects were also under constant attack, even those sympathetic to communism. Thus, in 1929, they arrested every last member of the communes between Sochi and Kosta. These communes ran everything, both production and distribution, on a communist basis, and it was all done fairly and honestly, in a way the rest of the country wouldn't achieve in 100 years. But alas, they were too literate. They were all well read. They knew how to read, and they were read in religious literature, and atheism was not their philosophy. Guys, that's what the left is trying to push. The socialism always, once a dictator takes over and has to control the masses, becomes communism, ladies and gentlemen. And communism can have no God but the dictator running it, ladies and gentlemen. Atheism was not their philosophy, which combined Baptist and Tolstoyan beliefs with those of yoga. It appeared that such a commune was criminal and that it could not bring people happiness. Not what the government decides is happiness. Do you see where this is going, ladies and gentlemen? In the 1920s, a large group of Tolstoyans was exiled to the foothills of the Altai, and there they established communal settlements jointly with the Baptists. When the construction of the Kuznetsk industrial complex began, they supplied it with food products, but then the arrests began. First, the teachers, they weren't teaching in accordance with the government program, folks. And the children, they ran after the cars and they shouted. And after that, the commune leaders, they were then taken. The big solitaire game played with the socialists went on and on uninterruptedly, of course. And in 1929, also, those historians who had not been sent abroad in time were arrested. Platonov, Tarley, Lyubovsky, Gautier, Lichavev, this is a horrible couple of names for me to be reading. I'm so sorry, ladies and gentlemen. Ismailov and the outstanding literary scholar M.M. Bakhtin, or Bakhtin. There we go. From one end of the country to the other, nationalities kept pouring in. The Yakuts were imprisoned after the revolt of 1928. The Buryat Mongols were imprisoned after the uprising of 1929, and they say about 35,000 of them were shot. A figure it has been impossible to verify. The Kazakhs were imprisoned after Budeny's cavalry heroically crushed their revolt in 1930 and 1931. The Union for Liberation of the Ukraine was then put on trial at the beginning of 1930. Folks, Professor Yefremov, Tchaikovsky, Nikovsky, etc. And knowing the ratio in our country of what is public to what is secret, how many others followed in their footstep, how many others were secretly arrested. Folks, sorry, I need to take a sip of this water here. Excuse me. I know this one is going a little long, but like I said, we are getting close to wrapping up here. But you see what's happening here, folks. They're struggling throughout the years. They're trying to stay in power. They're doing everything that they can to suppress the people, the peasants, us. We are the peasants. And this whole thing happens because other peasants let it happen. All right? This history is very, very important to understand, ladies and gentlemen. Look, there was an economic purpose to the development of the NEPMEN wave, the NEPMEN wave. And these are still talking about waves of arrests that happened, okay? Again, this is a huge and deep book. If you just want to listen to it, it's 30 hours to just listen to this book on tape. So trust me, we're cutting through this real quick. So if I left you confused at any part of this, please, please, please send me an email, jameslane@americanreveille.com. Ask me to clarify. You can be a critic. Give me the hard feedback. I'm still getting better at this. I'm not 7,000 videos in and writings in like other people, though I am nearing the 100 mark. So there is always room for me to improve, so please let me know. But look, there was an economic purpose to the development of NEPMEN wave. The state needed property and it needed gold, and there was as yet no kolima. The famous gold fever began at the end of 1929. Only the fever gripped not those looking for gold, but those from whom it was being shaken loose. The particular feature of this new gold wave was that the GPU was not actually accusing these rabbits of anything and was perfectly willing not to send them off to the Gulag country, but wished only to take away their gold by main force. So the prisons were packed, the interrogators were worn to a frazzle, but the transit prisons, prisoner transports, and camps received only relatively minor reinforcements. So who was arrested in the gold wave? All those who, at one time or another, 15 years before possibly, had a private business or had been involved in retail or had earned any wages at a craft, folks, and could have, according to the GPU's deductions, hoarded gold. So when they're redistributing the wealth and trying to bring forward socialism in this country, which eventually leads to communism, I want you to think about this type of thing. All right, when they need gold, when there is no competition, there is no capitalism, and the government starts failing and taxing people to death, and that stops working, so they start arresting people and shaking them up for money. Who are the people they take? Is it the rich people that they claim to be fighting? No, because those aren't the powerful people anymore. Remember, they're under the guise of fighting for the working class, which they are not. They're fighting for crazy, extreme ideologists in this country. But think about this. If you owned a private business, I'm done. Did you ever work in retail? I've worked in retail. I'm done. Earned wages at a craft? Yep, I'm done. I got the triple whammy right there, ladies and gentlemen. Have you ever done any of those three? Because you might be hoarding gold, ladies and gentlemen, and they might have a reason to rip you from your family and lock you in prison unless you pay the fee. But it so happened that they often had no gold. They had put their money into real estate or securities, which had melted away or had been taken away in the revolution. Remember, they had a big uprising, and nothing remained. They had high hopes, of course, in arresting dental technicians, jewelers, watch repairmen. Through denunciations, one could learn about gold in the most unexpected places. Maybe a veteran lathe worker had somewhere gotten hold of and held on to 60 gold, 5 ruble pieces from the Tsarist times, maybe. The famous Siberian partisan Muraviev, Muraviev had come to Odessa, bringing with him a small bag full of gold. The Petersburg, Tatar, drymen, all had gold hidden away. Whether or not these things were so could be discovered only inside prison walls. Nothing, neither proletarian origin nor revolutionary services, served as a defense against a gold denunciation. All were arrested. All were crammed into GPU cells in numbers no one had considered possible up to then, but that was all to the good. They would cough it up all the sooner. It even reached a point of such confusion that men and women were imprisoned in the same cells and used the latrine bucket in each other's presence. I mean, who cared about those niceties? Give up your gold, vipers. The interrogators did not write up charge sheets because no one needed their papers, and whether or not a sentence would be pasted on was of very little interest. Only one thing was important. Give up your gold, viper. The state needs gold, and you don't. The interrogators had neither voice nor strength left to threaten and torture. They had one universal method: feed the prisoners nothing but salt food and give them no water. And whoever coughed up the gold got the water. 1 gold piece for a cup of fresh water. People perish for cold metal. You know, it's amazing how crucial things such as water we take for granted, food, water, they use that as torture. Think about that. Imagine if you had $100 in your pocket and it was the last $100 you had, and they said to you, they locked you in a cell and they fed you nothing but salt, and you weren't allowed to drink anything. And if you gave them that $100, you would get a glass of water. That was it. They'd still torture you and beat you and starve you half to death until they realized you had nothing and either set you free, imprisoned you, or shot you. For the most part, people died or got put in prison, but people perish for cold metal, ladies and gentlemen. Think about how expensive a roll of toilet paper is in Venezuela. When we see the collapse of these societies. I mean, this is not a joke. This is real life, folks. This isn't a game. People die over things that are happening right now. People have to understand that. They really do. This is not anything that anybody wants to go through. But unfortunately, we're here and we have no choice but to go through it. So I want to read this last part here and then summarize what we talked about for a little bit, and then I'm going to let you absorb this. And so the waves foamed and rolled, but over them all in 1929 and 1930, it could be 2029 and 2030, billowed and gushed the multi-million wave of disposed kulaks. It was immeasurably large, and it could certainly not have been housed even in the highly developed network of Soviet interrogation prisons, which in any case were packed full by the gold wave that we just talked about. Instead, it bypassed the prisons, going directly to the transit prisons and camps onto prisoner transport into the Gulag country. In sheer size, this non-recurring tidal wave, it was an ocean, swelled beyond the bounds of anything the penal system of even an immense state could permit itself. It was so overcrowded, ladies and gentlemen. There was nothing to be compared with it in all Russian history. It was the forced resettlement of an entire people, an ethnic catastrophe, but yet so cleverly were the channels of the GPU Gulag organized that the cities would have noticed nothing had they not been stricken by a strange 3-year famine, all right, that came about without drought and without any war. And it was because the government was taking all of the food because people were starving. In other places, ladies and gentlemen, this wave was also distinct from all those which preceded it because no one had fussed about with taking the head of the family first and then working out what to do with the rest of the family. On the contrary, in this wave, they burned out whole nests, whole families from the start, and they watched jealously to be sure that none of the children, 14, 10, even 6 years old, got away. To the last scrapings, all had to go down the same road to the same common destruction. This was the first such experiment, at least in modern history. It was subsequently repeated by Hitler with the Jews, and again by Stalin and nationalities which were disloyal to him or suspected by him. This wave included only pathetically few of those kulaks for whom it was named, and so I want you to understand that kulak was a slang term, and it eventually came to mean anyone who was a peasant who wasn't poor and starving. If you owned a little land, or not own land, you couldn't own land, but if you had a business with people who worked for you, if you made money with some other people, if you weren't just starving to death and working off your bare hands, you were considered a kulak. And people were, I guess what the best word for it would be, they were incentivized to snitch on kulaks, on people like you and me who work hard and try to do good for our families. So those people could be imprisoned and usually shot and killed. This was before Hitler, and it continued after Hitler, ladies and gentlemen. That's what I wanted to read to you today. I know this went a little long. We're at about an hour and a half, and I could have just kept going and going and going, but I really thought that that section of chapter 2 in the Gulag Archipelago really puts in place where we are right now and where it could go in such a short period of time. These events started happening within a 10-year period after a revolution, folks. This is not anything that should be trifled with, folks. This all connects even from before with the Tsars into the execution of Anastasia and her entire family. I mean, history flows. It's not linear. It happens all at the same time and all in a pattern, and what happened once before will happen once again because we're human beings. We're stupid. We are imperfect creatures who make the same mistakes again and again, and we look and search for the light and try to perfect ourselves, and by the grace of whatever it is you worship and you believe in and I believe in, we work hard towards trying to become better creatures in the eyes of our Creator. So when you look at something like that, where they try to cut that out of our lives, where so many of the red flags are here right now, can you really say that we can trust the left, that after this is all said and done, we're good, it's all over with? I'm not asking for the same type of truth and reconciliation horror that they are. But what I am saying is that once we take this over, once Trump gets his reelection, once the Senate's in, we need to start making moves to ensure that this type of thing never happens again. We need to get our education system fixed. We have to get our country back on the right track. And it's going to take patriots like you and me to do that. Even after we win this struggle, folks, this ideology, this stuff that's spelled out in this book that I just read to you for a little bit, it's still fighting us. we still have the Great Reset to battle. We have all of this for years to come. These socialist Democrats, these communist wishers, these people that want capitalism to fall and crash and burn and want some socialist utopia to rise from its ashes, they're blind, they're confused, and they live off propaganda and the brainwashing of our brothers and sisters, our mothers and fathers, our neighbors, our children. They are trying to take it, and we will not let them. So, I really, again, appreciate you guys watching. Thank you so much. If you liked what I did here, if you found some value in it, and you're feeling generous, please do me a favor. Head over to www.americanreveille.com, hit the donation tab, and anything, 50 cents, $1, $10. If you have a Lamborghini and a jumbo jet, I'll take 100. I appreciate that. But I'm going to assure you that none of it's going in my pocket. It's going directly to the company, American Reveille LLC, and it will be used on upgrading our equipment and scaling our operations so we can get the word out to more patriots such as yourself, and we can organize, get together, and make sure that our communities are building stronger, tighter, and righter. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video and most likely on the next podcast Monday morning. Folks, enjoy your day. Thank you so much. God bless.
Oh, good. I am glad you're still here, comrade. I need you to do me big favor. I need you to go and hit this like button right here. I need you to hit this share button right here. And most important of all, I need you to come up here and hit the subscribe button. Yes, you have to hit the subscribe button and subscribe to American Reveille YouTube channel. Good. And then, comrade, when you're done, go up to the parlor. All right, I need you to find the parlor. Go into your app store, your Google Play Store, and find Parler, Parler. Okay, Parler. And when you get on the Parler, either in the app or www.parler.com, you come and find at the James Lane. The James Lane, the owner and the president of the American Reveille. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, thank you this so much, and I look forward to building gigantic, united, right-wing community with you.